Welcome back to the Writers Craft Summit. In this session, I'm speaking with Sacha Black. Sacha, welcome to the summit.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's kind of funny when I was trying to identify people to have on the summit, and then we were talking about different topics we could dig into. You and I were emailing a bit, and you were like, I could get into heroes and villains and this character stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, do you have some specific thoughts on that? And you were like, well, I actually wrote the book on heroes and villains. Sacha has a book on how to write heroes and a book on how to write villains. And so I think you are the perfect person for us to dig into this topic with.
Oh, thank you. I do have one or two opinions.
Well, let me hear first then, where do we start? Do we start with the heroes or do we start with the villain?
Let's start with my favorite, although I probably shouldn't say that, but the villains.
All right. So when you approach creating a villain, where do you start? What's important to you about a good villain?
Oh, so many things. My personal approach is still kind of changing and forming. And I don't necessarily do stacks of planning, but what I do is bear principles in mind. So for me, I find making sure that they have a very, very solid motive is essential. Motives are our reasons why we do things. And in order for a reader to relate to your villain, because they do need to relate to your villain just as much as they need to relate to your hero, they need to have a good motive. So, kind of having these world-ending, all I want to do is destroy, whatever, everything, that is one-dimensional. So having a motive is essential. That would be my first thing. My second thing would be to make sure that there is something in your villain's past that is driving their behavior. So we often talk about the hero and the wound in the hero's past that creates their flaw. But actually, your villain needs one too. So I always make sure there's some kind of wound, some kind of historical event that has changed or marked my villain in some way. And that's exactly the same for my hero as well. Now, the important thing is to make sure that that event is relevant to your plot. So if you can, make it relevant to your theme. So don't, I can't think, if whatever their flaw is, whatever your hero is trying to get over, and I know we're talking about the villain, but whatever your hero is trying to get over, make sure your villain is the opposite and they have something from their past that will directly kind of influence and get in the way of your hero's achieving his arc. So that's the second one. The third thing is to have your hero and your villain as opposites of each other. Now, obviously, that's a really obvious thing to say, but I'm talking specifically about your theme and your anti-theme. So good examples of this are the Hunger Games. So hopefully most people have heard of the Hunger Games. Katniss Everdeen is the protagonist, and she represents sacrifice. The villain, President Snow, is represents the anti-theme, which is to sacrifice everybody else for his gain. So they are kind of direct opposites of each other, and that it enables you to bring them into kind of this crashing conflict at various points in your novel. So yeah, those would probably be three, off the top of my head, three key things that I always make sure. Oh wait, no, oh my gosh, there's so much more. But yeah, they're the three things anyway for now.
It's funny when you were talking about the idea of the villain having a relatable flaw or just having a good objective. It reminded me of an early episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where this vampire character, Spike, who ended up becoming kind of a main character, or definitely becoming a main character on the show. But this was the first time he was kind of teaming up with the good guys, and they were like, they're like, why are you joining us or whatever? He's like, well, that other bad guy, he wants to destroy the world. And they're like, yeah. And he's like, I am in the world. I am a part of the world. And it was a nice little moment that differentiated him from a more generic character, because he wasn't just the evil, I'm going to destroy the world. He was like, I'm a part of this world, and yeah, I might be a bad guy, but I have my own things I like to do in life, and I don't really want to be dead.
Absolutely. I loved Spike and Buffy for that matter. But so there's two things on that. The first one is that he has integrity, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Oh no, now it's completely dropped out of my head. No, it's gone. So let me talk about the integrity. So basically, even when your villain is crazy, I've got the other one. It was a redemption arc. I'll come back to that. So integrity. Giving your villain integrity is one way to really solidify their crazy. So to give them integrity, they need some kind of a value or some kind of a something that they believe in. So a really, not cliche, but kind of borderline cliche value would be loyalty. Lots and lots of villains really value loyalty. Now, the way that you kind of turn that on its head is by making them adhere to that value so much that it becomes a negative. Or on the flip side, they adhere to it so much that they then become good temporarily, which is exactly what Spike did. And giving them integrity gives them kind of this 3D level of humanity, and you know, you can kind of fear what they might do, because what they say they're going to do, they really will do. And so that's why I really, really like that. But the other one was the redemption arc. And I always think this is such a fascinating play. I don't know if you've seen Once Upon a Time, the TV series,
No.
but oh my God, it's amazing. You have to watch it. But they have another character in there. So it's basically based on this fairy tale world set kind of, I guess it's urban fantasy, I suppose, in some ways. So it's set in the real world, but there's kind of this hived off fairy tale world where all of the fairy tales from all of the stories are real. And the evil queen has this epic redemption arc where she goes from being completely evil to, you know, being one of the heroes, and Spike kind of flits in and around that. And redemption arcs are one way to have a bit of a different kind of villain, and I suppose he had a mini redemption arc, and he was also probably an anti-hero rather than a villain. I think I'm a bit hazy. It's been a long time since I watched Buffy, but yeah.
I know one thing you do when you're thinking about characters, both heroes and villains, is drop them into kind of these three different buckets of, say, villain or hero, antagonist or protagonist, anti-villain or anti-hero. What do you mean by those three different categories?
So a villain is typically somebody who commits evil acts. So Lord Voldemort is very definitely a villain. An antagonist is somebody who opposes the hero, but might not necessarily do something like murder or torture. So an antagonist, you'd find them very typically in romance stories. So you'd have sort of, this debonair man who's terrible player or whatever, but they're not really innately evil. So that's a difference. And then it's the hero is kind of the same, really. So the hero is somebody who generally has superpowers. So Superman, Batman, gone completely blank on any other superhero. Yep. And
James
then
Bond.
yeah, exactly. And then the protagonist is who the story is about. So an interesting flip on that would be Hannibal Lecter, who is the protagonist, but is not a hero, because obviously he's a cannibal. Can't be a hero if you're a cannibal. So yeah, that's an example of that. Now, an anti-hero, they are absolutely, without doubt, my favorite, because they are so rich and gritty. So an anti-hero is somebody who is half and half. So they will have some kind of flaw that very definitely puts them in on the side of villainy. Whether that be, so Deadpool, perfect example. Beetlejuice is another example. They do very bad things. They kill people. They play tricks on people. They have a potty mouth. But the difference is they will do the right thing in the end. So Deadpool saves the girl. Beetlejuice invariably helps. I've completely forgotten the plot of Beetlejuice, but anyway,
The family.
That's
Winona
right.
Ryder.
Winona Ryder, that's it. So he does the right thing in the end. However, after they've done the right thing, they go back to being naughty is the only way I can describe it. They go back to being themselves. They don't change. They have a flat character arc in the same way that actually Katniss, who I mentioned earlier, has a flat character arc. She comes to the story, brilliant and sacrificing of herself. They just make better decisions. So that's really the difference between those three. Yeah.
I love it because I'm going to out myself here as I really loved The Last Jedi. A lot of people hated it, the last Star Wars movie. I liked it. And I primarily liked it because of, I guess, Ben Skywalker, the anti-villain moment where he joins Rey and they team up and you think he's going to be good, but then he has that fall from grace and he goes back to being bad. And there's just a moment where she's like, don't do this. And it breaks my heart because you're like, oh God, he's going to do it, isn't he? He's going to go back to being the baddie.
But that's why those characters are so delicious to write, because you can play on your reader's emotions so easily with those characters because you just don't know when they're going to do the right thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something to point out too, is this idea of unpredictability, right? I think sometimes writers think, oh, my character has to always behave a certain way because those are their defined characteristics, whereas some of the richest, most interesting characters are unpredictable and you don't know how they're going to react to any given situation.
Yeah, and that's really important because that's who we are as people, and that that reflects humanity. And readers quite often, whether it's conscious or subconscious, we do go to literature to kind of, work things out. Yes, okay, we're escaping and it's escapism and fantasy lands, but actually, this is why we've told stories since campfires and cavemen. We work things out about ourselves and about humanity, and so having that representation of unpredictability is really important. And just like you say, actually you can't have that unpredictability until you've established the traits, because having this consistent behavior in your characters, then when they react out of character, that's where you get the unpredictability. So you kind of can't have one without the other, really.
What about the idea of archetypes and that there's these archetypical characters? How might a writer approach that or play with that concept?
Well, I think it's really different between a villain and a hero. So with villains, I think there are kind of really obvious archetypes. You have your Lord of Darkness type archetype. You have your female villain. You have, the jealous villain. And I think that's because the stories aren't about them. And so it's much easier to kind of put them in two boxes. And whichever archetype you choose, and there are many and varied archetypes, what I always do is to choose the one that is best for the plot. So what will stand in the way of your hero the best? Whatever that is, choose that archetype. But for a hero, I think it's really different because you can have as many different types of heroes as there are books in the world. So I don't think you can really put a hero into an archetype box, but it's kind of like a web. It all connects together, and each character in your story is a reflection of each other. So I kind of look at it from the perspective of the theme. And so, for example, your theme of sacrifice, if we go back to the Hunger Games, you have Katniss, who embodies sacrificing herself for others. You have, I think her name was Rue.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that. But she basically makes a sacrifice to save Katniss from some bees or whatever it was in the trees. And so each of these characters plays a different role, but a different reflection on sacrifice. So Peter makes Katniss sacrifice over and over again, but actually he's sort of this wilting character, and there's kind of the plays on love there as well. So for the hero, it's different. You have to look at what it is that's going, what question you're answering in your book, and how each of these characters can form different challenges to your hero. You know, yeah. I don't know if I'm answering that very well, but
yeah, no, that's great. I mean, let's turn the conversation to heroes. I mean, these are the people that we're writing these stories about primarily. I know you have a term called the hero lens that you use. Could you dig into what that means?
absolutely. This is one of my favorite things. So it sounds really obvious, but I think we often forget this because we get so lost in kind of creating these, well, as a fantasy writer, I get lost in creating these worlds, but your reader experiences your novel through the eyes of your hero. No matter what happens in your book, you know, okay, fine, it might be through the eyes of an omniscient narrator, but let's forget that for a second. We're going through the eyes of your protagonist. So everything that happens, every action, every building that they see, every conversation, it happens through the eyes of your hero. Without your hero, your reader knows nothing. But what that means is you have to create this kind of full, rich world using your hero lens, essentially, you know, like rose-tinted spectacles. They are hero-tinted spectacles. And to do that fully, there are various different parts that make up your hero. So your hero's thoughts, your hero's actions, your hero's feelings, and your hero's senses. So that's kind of what makes up the lens. It kind of, to me, I see it as a bit of a funnel. You funnel everything through those four things. And it's the nuances between how I see color. For example, turquoise could be more blue and it could be more green for somebody else, but the way that your hero sees that is different to the way that any other hero sees that. So it's I always say that it's not the motivations or the traits that separate one hero from another. It's the lens, and it's, you know, how he or she feels differently to about each thing that he encounters.
Could you dig into the concept of bravery and sacrifice when it comes to the hero? Because I think these are two concepts that people are thinking about and working with when they're creating their characters and their character arcs.
Absolutely. So I think there's a bit of a myth around heroes. Everybody thinks that their hero needs to be super brave. You know, they have to save the day, they have to rescue the day. But bravery isn't, it's exciting, it's good, it's necessary, they need it, but it's not really what a reader connects to. It's the sacrifice that a hero makes that the reader connects to. So your hero will have a flaw. We all know that our heroes need a flaw. And they'll spend your entire book, your entire plot, you know, all your inciting incidents and your plot twists and whatever, trying to work their way through getting over this flaw. In order to do that, you'll reach the climax or just before the climax of your story. And in order to get over their flaw, they usually have to sacrifice something. And typically, because it's an internal flaw, they have to sacrifice a piece of themselves. Now, it could be a metaphorical piece. It could be a literal arm. I don't know. You know, each story is different. But they have to sacrifice something. And it's this sacrifice that your readers respond to, because it means that your heroes earned the win. So the greater the sacrifice, the more your reader will find it appealing. So that's why I think that actually bravery is a bit of a red herring, and you know, we could really forget the bravery. They're going to be brave anyway because they're going to be thrown into these terrible, you know, exciting and dangerous situations. Forget that. Concentrate on the sacrifice. What is it that your hero needs to sacrifice in order to be good enough to win? That's what your readers will find most appealing.
I'm reading The Hobbit to my daughter right now. And so as you were speaking about that, I was totally thinking about the fact that as I read her that book, the moments where I feel connected to Bilbo are never when he's being super heroic. It's when he's going, oh my God, this sucks so bad. I just want to be back in Hobbiton, back in my Hobbit hole, having some tea, right? It's like those little moments of humanity that connect you, not when they're being super cool and putting on a magic ring and fighting spiders or whatever.
That's it. It's those moments of pain when it hurts and the hero has to dig deeper. That's when the reader really connects with your characters.
Since you're a Buffy fan, my entire concept of how I try to finish off all my books was articulated in an episode of Buffy where there was this character, Andrew. He was filming Buffy and he was narrating like her life as she was experiencing it. And he said something along the lines of, there's Buffy enjoying victory, but always tainted by the sacrifice of what's been lost along the way. And I was like, that's it. That is how I like to end my stories. I want the good guys to win, but I want them to have had such a sacrifice in order to get that win that the victory is tainted. And I think that's exactly what
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, just, yes, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it's about. Every win needs to cost. It has to have a price. And the higher the price, the better it is for the reader. Not necessarily for your hero, but your reader will love it.
What about this concept of a web of connectivity? Can you dig into that?
So it's a little bit like what I was trying to say earlier around the characters all being a reflection of each other. But I like to see stories as like a spider's web. So a spider's web is kind of a ring of concentric, well, not quite circles, perhaps they're like octagons or something. But anyway, let's, for the sake of ease, say they're circles. But they're all connected by little lines and dots, lines and dots, you know, the sort of these connections around the webs. And our stories are exactly the same. So your theme connects to the question that your book is asking, which connects to the flaw that, well, it should connect to the flaw that your hero has, which should connect to the obstacles that your hero then needs to face, which should then connect to the characters that surround your hero in order that he can defeat these obstacles, in order that he can defeat his flaw, in order that he can answer the question, which then defeats the villain, you know? So all of these things connect to each other, and it sounds like a really overly complex, heavily plotted kind of thing, but actually we all do this naturally. And if you look at film even, or TV shows, there is this kind of basis, this web that every good story will sit on, and you will essentially, you have your book's theme, and from your theme, whether that be sacrifice, like the examples that we've used, you'll have a moral question or a kind of thematic question. You know, and that's what your hero is driving towards answering. And in order to answer it, he has to overcome his flaw. Usually it's the thing that he needs to get, or the piece inside him that's missing that, you know, that he has to get over. It's this kind of thematic type flaw. And in order to answer that, he will have to go through all of these tests or obstacles. And each test should be based on that flaw, which is based on the theme. So, you know, these obstacles should test over and over again. So can you sacrifice yourself again if you're Katniss? Can you, you know, run into danger again? Can you give another piece of yourself away? These are all different questions based on the theme and on this moral question or thematic question. And then the same thing goes for the characters. So, you know, we talked about earlier how each character is a different reflection or a different aspect of sacrifice, even the villain who sacrifices others for the sake of himself. Even the there's kind of these wolf monster type animals right in the end of the Hunger Games, and they are previous tributes who have been sacrificed again after dying. They've kind of been recreated into these beastly things. I just remember the flood when they're all on that kind of thing in the middle. Anyway, so, you know, these are all different reflections. It's all connected. So yeah, that's the way that I see stories. They're kind of this spidery. I hate spiders. I don't know why I use this analogy, but I do. Anyway, so it's a web. It's a web. Your book's a web. I can't hear you.
I hit the mute button. Yeah, I was just saying, you're going to spend the next 10 years teaching spiderweb related methodologies, hating spiders.
I know. Oh.
Sacha, this has been a fantastic conversation about creating heroes and villains. And I know you have a really cool giveaway, a worksheet pertaining to villains. Tell people about that.
I do. It's 17 pages. I have no idea why I picked that number, but that's just where it ended up. So it's a 17-page cheat sheet. It's kind of has some content and then some questions to help you start to develop your villain. And I can share the link. You can either get it straight to on my website, www.sashablack.co.uk, Sacha with a C, or I can give you the link and we can put it.
Yeah, there'll be a link right below the video where people will be able to click on that. Well, Sacha, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the summit today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor to be here.